Welcome back to The Grind. In this video, we're going to talk about how to get the highest PI for your champions with masteries and what that setup will be and what variations you can consider. First, we're going to talk about what PI means, or power index, which is also sometimes referred to as hero rating, but also what it is not. It is not prestige. Prestige and your champion's PI, or the power index, that number that is underneath or next to your champion, that is not the champion's prestige. It is the power index. The difference is the power index or hero rating is based off of all the boosts and masteries and modifications that you have active, whereas the prestige is a base value that is not modified by those at all. So a champion that is higher on your list based on their rating does not necessarily have a higher prestige. So you have to keep those separate. So then why does hero rating or PI matter? Well, it looks cool, that's one thing, but mostly it's for arena purposes. Now, in arena, you get points based off of your champion's power rating. It is slightly increased, but only marginally based on the power index. And that is important for those who grind arena a lot, but it's not really that important if you're not that committed to the arena. Because if you can get a couple extra % of points from having a higher rating, averaged over hundreds and hundreds of fights, that works up to be a significant number. But if you don't really do arena that often, you're not really getting much of a benefit from having a higher number. Now, the other benefit is that most of the masteries that do give you a higher power index or hero rating, they also give your champions more damage, and therefore it makes fights a little bit quicker and sometimes easier. But as we'll discuss, some of them do have their drawbacks. So for just an example, let's filter it to see the 4 stars. And let's say we're using the 4 stars in our 4-star arena. Most of these 4 stars are over 7,000 power index, and that is because of the masteries. And of course, some of them drop down towards 6,000, and then the ones that are only rank 4 are in the 5,000s. Now, this is much higher than their base value. Of course, masteries do bring them up significantly. And if I was to have higher sig levels on some of these champions, then that would also bring it up as well. This one is maxed out. So let's see what masteries I currently have active and if I could make some changes. Now, I do not have the optimal setup for the max power index. And one of the examples I'm going to point out right away is right here. Cruelty is a very good mastery for increasing your rating for very cheap. And you can get it very early on. And if you're going to choose between precision and cruelty, cruelty actually gives almost twice the amount that you would get from having the point in precision. So that is something for you to consider depending on what you are choosing. So what I have is the suicide masteries on liquid courage and double edge. And again, I'm going to point out liquid courage has a much more significant impact on your power index than would having double edge. So if you were going to choose a single suicide mastery setup, then liquid courage would be the one that would give you the highest power index for your champions. Now, the drawback to this is it takes up a lot of masteries. It is very expensive to initially unlock, and you have to deal with recoil, which means every time you throw a special attack, you're going to sacrifice 5% health for some added damage. And also, if you're not bleed immune or poison immune, your champions are going to take damage from liquid courage and double edge. So that is something to consider, because that is not something that everybody has the roster for, or that everyone is prepared to play around. So what are some of the high points here? Well, as we said, liquid courage and double edge are the high points if you can manage to get that done. And then going here into deep wounds and assassin, at least the first couple do give a good bump for the cost that it would take to get there. I do like playing Nick Fury and some other bleed champions, so I like to max out deep wounds. And I just ran through the gauntlet, so I had 2 in assassin, but 1, of course, for most content is more than enough. And the second point in assassin is about half the value of points as well, so you might want to put it elsewhere, for example, into something cheaper like cruelty, which also has a pretty good PI bump. Something else that is important to consider is this courage one. Doesn't seem maybe as impactful at first, but a lot of times you're playing with your champions below 50% health, so you'll have a 20% bonus when maxed out. And this also is a pretty good one for the PI. Now, what I would prefer to have is 2 more points into cruelty. But when you look over at my defense, I have 2 points in coagulate, which I don't think is helping my PI very much and would be better off in cruelty. But because I am running suicides and I have several champions I like to use that are not immune to bleed, I do like to have that extra resistance to the bleed there. And the setup that I have here is all basically just to unlock max willpower, which does actually give a fairly nice bump in your PI. And then over to proficiencies. My proficiencies are sparse. When I am running suicides, I run a very empty proficiency tree so that I can have max deep wounds as well as both liquid courage and double edge. Now, in the proficiencies, something to consider is Stupefy actually has a pretty significant PI boost. Obviously, it is a very impactful mastery that most people will always have because it increases the stun duration. So that is something that you'll likely have maxed out most of the time anyways, and not really have to think about that too much. However, if you do take some points out of Deep Wounds and Assassin, you will be able to unlock the Mystic Dispersion mastery, at least up to 3 of them, and especially if you're not running Coagulate, while still hitting most or all of the major high points from the offensive tree for your PI boost. So there is a little bit of wiggle room, and again, the minor differences that you're going to have from taking 1 point out of something or 2 points out of another thing and putting it into something different, the minor PI difference from that, unless you're skipping on the major winners, is really not going to amount to much. And as far as arena points, it's not going to be that significant. But one of the most important things is having a setup that is going to benefit the champions that you're using and that you are going to enjoy using, because if you have no champions that bleed, you're not going to benefit from having max deep wounds, and so you would be better off investing them elsewhere in something that at least benefits you. And another thing to consider is that each mastery affects different champions in different ways as far as their PI. So having Mystic Dispersion is going to boost your Mystic champions a little bit better, whereas it's not going to help out the other champions. And so here is a more recommended setup, and I'll talk about some variability that you can have and choose, but maybe this would be a good rough guide. So of course we're doing it with the maxed out suicides because those give the highest bonuses. I have 4 in deep wounds, 1 in assassin, and then 3 in despair is something you can consider because despair gives a pretty solid boost to your PI. The extra points that I was considering putting elsewhere, you don't get as much from glass cannon or precision, and so I recommended maybe putting it down in despair because that's also a very useful mastery, although some people don't like it because it does add some randomness. Some of the main ones not to skip out on from this page are max courage and max cruelty. Those ones are some of the ones that give you the most bang for your buck. Now, moving on to the defensive tree, this is how I set mine up to get willpower. It's not for a PI boost really in any way. It's just that having willpower is so impactful. And I was resistant to reworking my masteries when I came back to playing the game again because I was like, hey, I'm like, above average of a player. I don't need the fail safe. But honestly, it's beyond words how useful this is, and it can save you so many revives and health potions throughout the game. You should just do that. And what I like is having at least 3 points in stand your ground. I started doing that one a few months ago, and it has saved me so many times because you can resist heavy attacks. I do end up occasionally making mistakes and get hit by heavy attacks, and a lot of times this saves me. And moving on to the final one, you can have a pretty sparse proficiency tree and still get by without too much difficulty. But if you do want to have at least 3 points in Mystic Dispersion, you need 7 more points in this tree, and you can get those 7 points from taking some away from Despair, from Deep Wounds, and from Assassin. Maybe take 1 out of Cruelty or Precision if you are okay skipping out on that, or if you don't run a full suicide tree and you just do half of it, then you'll have extra points to then put down into Mystic Dispersion. Now, if you are not going to run suicides, then you are not going to have the highest PI for your champions. However, the same baseline points still apply. Max out cruelty, max out courage, get despair, get deep wounds, get assassin, and those are going to be the biggest impacts from the offensive tree for you. And then you can get some other points from the like stupefy and dispersion if you want your mystics to have a bit of a boost. But again, the suicide masteries with double edge and liquid courage are just the most impactful for the PI boost. So I do hope that this video was helpful to have a better understanding of how masteries affects PI and hero rating and what the benefits are. Let me know what masteries you run or do not run, and I do hope this video was helpful. Good luck, and I hope to see you in the next video.